Welcome to this week's episode of Charming Accent Interviews with Mimi Castile. Friends, yes, once again, I am bringing to you another great thinker who also has a very charming accent. Yes, today we are speaking with Nicole Masters, whom many of you will know. Nicole is one of the kind of world leaders in the soil health space. She's written the book For the Love of Soil. She also is the founder of Integrity Soils, which is an organization that does lots of educating. Nicole herself is a very accomplished educator. Some of her formal training is in adult education, and it really comes through in her work with people on the land, because I think that she's looking at sort of an outcomes-based framework for getting people to be interested in what I know you're all interested in, which is soil. So today we get to get deep in that rich substrate with Nicole Masters. And if you're not familiar with Nicole and Nicole's work, I highly recommend you look her up. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube, and she gives workshops all over the world. I think she's looking to do more of that from a solid location in the future. So we do a little sneak peek at what her plans are. And we talk about a lot of things today in today's episode, but she's like many New Zealanders, many Kiwis, she's just got such a joyful way of being and way of looking at things, and she loves connecting with people. So I highly recommend that you look for Nicole's workshops in your area and find her book, For the Love of Soil. It's a great one. Here we go. Nicole Masters.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. It's seed browsing season, and High Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30 new seed varieties for 2024. These beautiful and productive vegetable, flower, and herb varieties are 100% organic, non-GMO project verified, and trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. Whether you're trying to bring your best to your CSA, wholesale assortment, or to the weekly farmers market, High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and the grower rep support you need to help get you to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com and sign up for your free catalog today. That's highmowingseeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Marbleseed Organic Farming Conference. All right, everyone, important public service announcement. I know some of you are already making plans for how you'll spend the winter, ordering tools, researching seeds, projecting crops. It's also a great time to gather with other farmers to share knowledge and skills. This February, join thousands of farmers like you from across the U.S. for 3 days of community building and farmer-led learning at the 35th Annual Marbleseed Organic Farming Conference in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Find out more and register at marbleseed.org/conference. That's marbleseed.org/conference. All right, enjoy the show.
Nicole Masters, welcome back to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast. I know you were interviewed by our man in the Southern Hemisphere, Mikey, a couple years ago. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Most of our listenership is going to be very familiar with at least your book, if not your work. And since you have been a guest on the podcast today, I thought we'd go in a different direction with our conversation. So I hope you're up for some interesting diversions from the usual topics.
Totally, always.
Awesome. Well, most people will know you, but I think it would be great if you would give us your background, give us your, however deep you want to go into your journey, because I think one of the most interesting things about, at least for me, having these conversations is that I rarely meet a person in this space who hasn't had a very circuitous path to how they've come to their work. So we would love to hear yours.
I don't think I would assume that people would know me at all. It always amazes me. I saw a homesteaders video recently on YouTube, and they are Estonian, and they were in somewhere, I can't remember, and their book was in the background and I was like, how is that possible? Particularly when you're self-published, that someone could get hold of your book. And I always find this question of like how I think you're so right, like our meandering paths that lead us to some place. And I think so much of what's led me here has been listening to my intuition and my unstoppable nature, which my mother tells me. I think this is a good exercise. I think it's something that everyone could do, is go and ask the people closest to you if they had to describe you in 5 words, how would they describe your essence? And so what's that piece of you that no matter what, people would still know, oh yeah, that's the signature of this person. So I asked my mum that, and the first thing she said was unstoppable. And we'd never had that conversation. I'm like, wow, I'd never kind of put it through that lens, but it's that unstoppability, I think, that has led me to be an agroecologist, to originally consult and now coach some of the biggest farms and operations in the world, and be able to coach and train some of the most extraordinary people. Like, it's been this absolute privilege, but I think my unstoppable nature is what's kind of allowed me to kind of keep pushing through adversity. I'm a New Zealander. People might be wondering what the accent is. So born and raised in New Zealand, not to a farming family, to a military family. So we traveled a lot. And I think that's what I bring to this work, is seeing people's different contexts and being able to be with people no matter their background, and just to bring curiosity. And perhaps I used to always feel like an outsider, and I was okay with that. Whereas now I just feel like I belong, and it doesn't really matter where I am in the world. Just to have deeper conversations about what does it look like to bring vibrancy and life and joy and profitability and all of this to landscapes once more. So I think I can talk about other things, but I think that's it in a nutshell.
Yes, I think the the exercise of having people describe you in 5 words or less is probably very it'd be terrifying for me to do that exercise. Yes. I think you'd learn a lot.
I don't find people don't necessarily say the meanest stuff, but they might say stubborn, and you'd be like, well, that's a superpower. Thank you very much.
That's right. Exactly. It's how I persevere. So
Yes.
As you mentioned, you've been working with people and training people for, more than a decade. And it would be really cool for you to just share the sort of, whatever size handful of things that you've learned from those experience, and how your thinking might have changed or evolved over time, and or remained the same.
So in 1999, I was managing community gardens. I was pregnant at the time, ended up back in my old hometown, and, community gardens was a great way to kind of work, I don't know, in a more connected way. And what was interesting is those community gardens had been established because the land was idle, and it was owned by the city. So the city gave that land to the community gardens. But what was the most interesting piece is no one asked the community. So you had, I guess in those days, it was probably a bit of a hippie, and bringing in food and, setting up all these garden beds and having seedling trays and wanting to provide food to a community that was not engaged in the process at all. So we dealt with a huge amount of vandalism. At least once a week, if not more, people would come in and tip all the seedling trays out and, spray paint. And it was just this devastation. And I had this realization that, we don't enforce change upon a community. It's done within the community and asking communities what they need. So people might know me from my soil work, but half my work's actually been in the behavioral change, organizational learning space. And that's, I think these days, what gets me most excited is we are in the middle of an arising evolution of consciousness in how we relate to landscapes, how we relate to food and to each other. And being part of that in terms of a lot of what we're dealing with right now is urgency, right? And it's how do we deal with urgency in a way that's not disempowering? And so that's kind of one of my biggest drivers, is working with people to really look at how can we be more effective with the things that we're passionate about.
It strikes me, and it has struck me watching just watching the evolution of integrity soils and how you are doing so much work now with your, the personal part of the work, which I have really come to believe is, without it, we can do whatever we want and it won't be durable, and that people really need to be met where they are in that journey. So, I think it's really powerful for a leader like you to be kind of leading the charge in that way. I know there are other people who are working on organizational behavior, but I think anybody who's worked in agroecology, the ecological answers are known. They're there. It's about connections and broken relationships. And I think it's really brave, actually, to be doing that work in a space that really is about still kind of attacking a bit of a, symptomatic approach as opposed to the sort of holistic, because it includes, if not centers around the human beings and whether or not they're prepared to make that change.
Yeah. And I think for us, it was the dream is how do we train people in seeing wholes, and how do we take it beyond the words of mindset or paradigms or all of these terms that we've seen, thrown around for many decades, is how does this become a lived experience so that things that were possible in the past become abhorrent? And this is the piece of transformation as opposed to change. And if you look at a lot of, that might be, say, climate change, take a big topic, a lot of the change initiatives have come from fear or they come from guilt. And what we know in the neuroscience of change is that actually that creates the opposite outcome of what you're wanting. So what we're seeing right now is increased consumerism, increased emissions, that literally humans just put the foot to the pedal and just flooring it off this cliff, rather than, hey, wow, we've been aware of some of this stuff for 50 years. And it doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not, but the calamity of the loss of biodiversity and just that, or plastic pollution, take all of that, like these huge things that are coming at us hard and fast. What it requires is for us to be able to see the world differently and interact with that differently. And then what starts to occur becomes long-term solutions as opposed to short-term reactionary potential unintended consequences that we see from a lack of thinking and long-term thinking. But I think the main thing for us is like this whole push for labeling and this whole push for definitions is that we're going from this way of interacting with the world that we make the world fit to us. And I think it's as clear as that. We're trying to make the world more controllable, less instability, less uncertainty, and that world to fit to me has unintended consequences because you're operating outside of nature's rules, as opposed to a shift in a paradigm where we fit to the world. So how do I get in sync with nature? How do I look at the principles of what works well in nature? So like one principle might be that waste is a resource. So there's no waste in nature that always becomes someone else's food or someone else's house or whatever that looks like. So for us, really asking those questions more deeply, different outcomes become possible. And that's why I don't like these narrow focuses on labeling, is because what we're doing is we're shifting how we relate to the world. It's an entire new way of interacting. And I say new as in new from the industrial era. This is it's our ancestral knowledge. It's how our ancestors interacted with the world. But now we do have science and we do have other ways that we can understand the world around us. So I don't feel, this is not new, but at the same time, we're not going backwards in time either.
Right. No. And I think, I'd actually like to go a little deeper there because there is this, fairly emergent rush now to put definitions to, these what can't be defined. The way that I think about it is really it's ways of being where words are descriptors, but they're not definitions. We need ways of being, and I would love it if you would speak more to that, because I think that right now it is happening. People are, trying to in a very Western way, define this space so that there can be some kind of commerce and exchange around it. And while we do need to protect the integrity of the direction of our actions, that's very different than I think what you're getting at. So please riff on.
Well, I think for me, Mimi, it becomes we need a description in terms of needing to understand each other's language. We need definitions as such. And, there are definitions for what it means to be regenerating. I think for me, it's a verb. It's an action that we are in a process of a journey of improving whatever these outcomes might be. And those outcomes are broad. That's from the human health aspect, the joy aspect, the water quality, the animal humane, like that whole picture of how do I continue to make good better and better best, like this, that we're always on this evolving journey. And I think where we trip up is that we're trying to turn regenerative into a noun, that it's fixed. This definition, we have these soil health principles, and therefore you are regenerative, or you are planting a cover crop and you're regenerative. And it's so deeply flawed, because you can do any practice and have that improve or degrade your outcomes depending on what you want to do. Every single one of these practices can be used not in the way that perhaps it was intended. So that's why I think for me, a lot of this defining piece comes from the quality angle, and it comes from the ecosystem function angle. And so if we can, benchmark where you are now, and that might be, let's say in potato production, like choose the hardest, one of the hardest crops, potatoes or peanuts, and say, how do we do this in a way that actually increases the health overall of the ecosystem, and have that as your point of reference, while ensuring that your business is operational, while ensuring that, people that work for you and yourself are happy and healthy, and all of that piece. Like it's a big thing to track. But what we're seeing now is incredible research that's now emerging around metabolomics, and being able to demonstrate that the quality of the food and the soil that it was grown in actually impacts on human health. Now, we've known that intuitively, of course, for a long time, and we can pick different pieces of that to demonstrate, yes, that food quality, microbial activity all relates to human health. But now we have studies that have tracked it all the way from the field to the human, which is a world first. So, and that paper is going to be published in next month's Nature, or this early next year, which is very exciting. But I think if we're thinking about potatoes or large-scale potato production, you're looking at systems that right now are designed to fit in an industrial model, which means that you can't really rotate crops very well. You can't take some areas and put them into livestock, for instance. So it becomes, how do I earn the right to get in there and cultivate and continue to cultivate and really disturb that soil, so that I'm increasing my soil health, and then you come along and you're, planting, cultivating, doing all that pulling that crop out of the ground. And then actually that soil has still only possibly gone back 3 years in time, but that you're always just kind of incrementally moving that soil forward. And so it might be that you are intercropping and having other crop species. It might be that you are using mulches or using other ways to approach it, but it's through that lens of innovation that if we say this is the task that I'm setting myself, how do I keep improving soil quality, water quality, be a sink for greenhouse gases, is that the innovation is coming. So seeing people coming up with some really, really pretty neat stuff. And, I work with rootstock nurseries that are incredibly disturbed, highly disturbed environments. And, they've found a system. So they're on a 3-year, I'm building up something. And then in the 3rd year, when we put rootstock in, that we take it back to where it was 3 years ago. And so we're not degrading it, but we're building that soil up to a health status that actually can deal with a little bit of ag chemical, or it can deal with a little bit of cultivation, and you're not just totally bringing rack and ruin to that soil.
Yeah, the nursery space is so interesting because there's so much opportunity for innovation. Last season, I spoke to a wonderful woman up in Canada, and they're just curious about how they can do better, and they figure things out. And I think that's what, for me, that's what this work really is all about, is, keep following your curiosity and your capacity to make observations and then make sort of benign adjustments to what you're doing. So when you're working with producers, do you find, because I can imagine there being times when you're having these conversations and really trying to get to the core of what it takes to kind of think about things differently, to think about your role, not even your role, but your belonging in nature. And have there been times where you've had to, try multiple different ways to kind of get to that with people? Because I think, sometimes people are nodding and sort of agreeing, but they're like maybe uncomfortable about the, the ways that they personally are involved in this process, as opposed to, we're just talking about my farm, So I'd love to hear what that's been like for you, and how you've approached getting to the core of that conversation.
It's so fun. I really enjoy it. And what's quite interesting is the folded armed, old school, traditional, grumpy characters that sometimes I deal with become your biggest champions. I mean, the ones that can be the hardest, it feels at the start, to shift, then become the hardest ones to disagree with when they really do see what's possible on their properties. And I think it's that whole idea of like that aha and that shift can come from a moment of seeing the light, or a moment when we feel the heat. So I'm looking, when I'm working with someone, is like, where's that aha, or where's the heat? All right, what's brought them to me in the first place is often being aware that there's a need for a change, and then sometimes not knowing how to do that. And I'm talking in the past as well. So these days, I'm not doing any. I do very little individual consulting. I have a couple of superstar clients that are just so fun to work with that I keep them. And even with working with students, we all have these places where we're like, oh, that's interesting, or actually I've heard that before, or I don't need that, or I'm not interested in that. So even working with students, we're looking for where's that place that you hit that possibility is clamped down. Where does that shut down? So when I'm working with large scale cropping operations, it might be, hey, let's take a look at what's happening with root systems. Let's dig a hole under a fence line. Let's look at where water is ponding. Did it used to pond like that? Bringing some of that history of awareness that a system's been degraded, and then that aha of like, you mean that my soil is got water ponding in it, that it's eroding, I've lost all my structure is because of the actions that I've been taking, because we can compare that to a fence line. So often a fence line can be one of the best kind of ahas. But I'm always looking for, what if anything was possible, you could wave a magic wand. What do you want to see? What do you really want to see? And what you find is that I've never met a farmer that's like literally, hey, I'm here to exploit the crickets out of this. I want to destroy this environment. I want everything to die. Like it's not actually a reality. When you meet people, they genuinely are interested in land stewardship. They are interested in soil health. They just don't necessarily know what it looks like. What does it feel like when everyone's doing the same thing, right? And so I think it's always a different type of conversation. Some people are like, I want to be able to pass this on to my kids, and it's like, are your kids interested in taking this on? What's happening with your children's health? How does that relate to what we've been doing on the farm? And not to make blame, because that's not an effective change agent. And not the other thing, I think why we've been successful is we don't bring dogma. So I'm not dogmatic when I'm working with people. I have never used an ag chemical in my life, but I work with people that use just incredible amounts of chemicals and regular calendar spraying, and I've just got to be okay and walk in their shoes a little bit to go, all right, well, what out of this is absolutely critical for your operation right now, and what is actually a really good sales pitch from a chemical company that's actually setting you up for failure. So I'll train them in some tools so they can actually test plants before and after a fungicide spray, for instance, and go, that fungicide spray is actually weakening that plant, so that plant's going to be more likely to be attacked by insects. And you can measure that. You can see that for yourself. Those fungicides are actually taking your whole operation in the wrong direction for what you want to achieve. So yeah, I think there's so much to it, Mimi. I think it's such a big conversation when you're working with someone, because it's all their individual needs.
Yeah. And everybody's, I think there's that part of you, because I agree with you. I have never met a person who is genuinely on the land who wants to do worse by it. But then there's this shame and this fear and this sort of unknowing, and also I think the responsibility of being the one who is going to decide to make a shift, and what responsibility that carries. And have you found that for, all these years that you've been working with people, are there very common themes to the barriers, even the sort of personal barriers and limitations to, people making that change?
I think the biggest barrier is internal, and it's peer pressure. It's the concern about what the neighbors might think. It's concern about what the community will think, and just not wanting to rock the boat. And also you can think of peer pressure as like tradition as being peer pressure from dead people. So we get that idea that like, this is the way my grandfather did it, my father did it. I need to kind of keep following in those footsteps. So that takes a lot. We are, at the end of the day, very simple. We're animals, right? We're still social beasts that require social structures around us for safety and for acknowledgement, or all of these pieces that just, and I think particularly in agriculture, peer pressure is such a force. And so looking at how can we actually use peer pressure for good? And so supporting what we call the opinion leaders, or supporting people within a community that people respect, that they can go down to the bar or the pub and talk about what they're doing in a way that starts to normalize soil health. And that's where we're seeing the takeoff in many areas, is where we're starting to normalize the conversation and make it fun. So it becomes almost a competition, like who can build the fastest soil health, who can have the most diversity in their cover crops. I'm seeing a lot of that. It's quite fun. Seeing people actually using the land that's right next to the road, planting sunflowers, planting a whole lot of diversity. So people are like stopping in their cars and just, instead of being judged, it's like, hey, did you see everyone's taking photos outside my place? And it becomes like something to be really proud of, that there's all this insect and bird life and all of that coming back. But yes, I really feel like that ability to, you've got to be very courageous in a rural community to buck what's normal.
Yeah. The community leadership, I think, has been really transformational, because it does take those courageous examples, especially when, maybe a lot of people don't agree with them, but they respect them. And they have that sort of tenure, and that, having walked the walk just like everyone else in that region. And yet here we look very different, and our outcomes are very different, and we're not being judgmental about it. But if you're curious, come on over the fence line.
Yeah. And you're involved in wine, right? So, the wine industry can be the biggest, trendiest, flashiest industry, but it's also one where people do talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And also the one, if we're going to think about terroir and flavor profiles, it's all about microbiology. And right now we have the terroir of glyphosate.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, really? Can we have a different conversation? So I feel like we see a lot of innovation coming out of wine.
Well, and I think wine has this, it's almost not the canary in the coal mine. That's a bad analogy, but it is an indicator of where things are going in terms of the public opinion of value-added agriculture. And we tell a lot of stories. I mean, our whole value add, one might say, isn't the winemaking, but it's the storytelling. And I think that there's huge promise in that, if we were to be speaking in truths instead of in abstracts and the stories that we want to tell about ourselves. But if we were really showing people, it doesn't just make a difference, it makes the only meaningful difference in what we're doing and how we're belonging to a place and how we're relating to the people that are also belonging to this place.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by High Country News. High Country News is an independent, nonprofit publication that has been covering the Western United States for more than 50 years. High Country News provides unique, on-the-ground reporting on the land, water, wildlife, and communities of the region, with dedicated coverage of climate, environmental, and Indigenous issues. Sign up for free newsletters or a trial of the magazine at hcn.org. That's hcn.org/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by Local Line. Get ahead this year with Local Line. Local Line is the all-in-one sales platform for farmers and food hubs. Increase your sales and streamline your processes with features including e-commerce, inventory management, subscriptions, online payments, and more. Trusted by thousands of farmers around the world, Local Line is the platform that you need to take your farm to the next level. Subscriptions start as low as $39 a month. Try Local Line today and receive a free premium feature for 1 year using our coupon code NOTIL, all caps, one word, at localline.ca. That's localline.ca, code NOTIL. All right, back to the show.
So one of the themes that I wanted to really dive into with you, because I encourage everyone to go back and listen to Mikey's interview with you, which is very, very good and very much on point with, the sort of regenerative steps and everything. But I would love to talk about transitions with you. And, starting with the practical, moving into the figurative. And so when you, I know that you are really interested in some of these really big problematic cropping systems that are, dominating world agriculture. And when you think about those capital T transitions, how do you relate small scale agriculture to that larger change? And where do you see the work being in shifting those systems or even opening them up to where we hope for them to go.
Are you talking large or small?
Both, really. But I think most people listening are going to be on the smaller side. And yet we all know, especially those of us who grow food, are hyper aware of these, quote unquote food crops, the big ones, the seeds, the pulses. So when you think about relating those to one another and what it will take to shift those big crops, walk me through your problem solving or even, kind of goal setting around what would that transition look like?
So my average cropping client was about 10,000 acres, and so anything that when you're dealing with that kind of acreage is systems are set up for efficiency, systems are set up for big, and there's a lot of important, it's important timing, which I think is important for every crop, but it's just critical if you're going to get over that amount of land, is we have what we call the methadone program in order to help support someone on a high input system to just buffer some of that input that they're using. And that might be in buffering. And I talk about buffering in terms of like carbon-based foods or inoculums or compost extracts or worm extracts, of how do I reduce the amount of nitrogen I'm putting in? How can I make phosphorus optimized? How do I reduce herbicide? Then all of that comes down to how do I feed microbiology, and am I addressing the major structural problems in a soil? So if you've got a plow pan or soil crusting or the more, we call them cow pans, that more shallow pan, is that soil breathing? And so kind of coming at it from just the very simple things of like, all right, you're in this intensive system, your equipment's all set up for this. We need products that aren't going to block. We need it to be simple and habit-based so that we can put, let's say something like a fulvic acid, and we sit it next to where the herbicide is, and we reduce that herbicide. This is non-selective herbicides by 30%. And we put in a bit of fulvic acid, you're going to save money and you're feeding microbiology. All right, let's get started. So it's each piece of what the people on the ground, but the bigger issue is you're inside a commodity system. You're inside an industrial model that was, get big or get out. And it doesn't reward people on quality. It's not interested at all in, do you have nil residues and high digestibility in your grains? Like that, none of that conversation is really coming up. So what I'm seeing is cooperatives are rising, farmers getting together and going around the commodity markets and probably, getting out of things like feeding cattle or in CAFOs. Like the whole system needs to be altered, and really it's just facing that whole lie about we must feed the world and that we need industrial agriculture to do that is just so deeply flawed. And particularly when you look at food wastage or you look at how much of our expansion has actually been due to plant breeding or to access to water. It's not just this, we must put all these inputs in, because most of those inputs are ineffective and they're ending up in your waterways or up in the atmosphere. So I think it's such a big question because we've got to address the fact that these guys are embedded into a commodity system. And what I see is that they don't need all of that land necessarily, that actually you can do more with less. And again, that takes a whole systems change. But if you start to be rewarded for better food quality, and you don't have the same wastage because of insects and pests and all the rest of it, then, could you go from 10,000 to 7,000? Maybe. And then could you bring other people onto the land? Because we're seeing young people not being able to return, about growing, like just growing soy and then just growing corn. You're not actually feeding people. So how do we get back to integrated intercropping system, growing food crops and bringing people back? Sorry, Mimi, it's such a big question,
No, I think it's great. I mean, these are the more meaningful, I think, getting to these chicken and egg questions where, you can work with somebody who's on 10,000 acres, who's very tied to, just making it through one more season. And they've been dealt, maybe 5 or 6 seasons in a row of, extreme sort of realities of climate change and very, very much declining bottom lines. And so it's for me, it's what I think about most of the time is that space between getting someone to see what's possible and how they haven't even known the questions, to ask yet. And then getting to this much bigger question or philosophy around how much land, how do we really want to live in the future, and how much of this land really needs to be under some type of intensive cultivation, and how much of it could actually be something else. And I just wonder, do you feel like that conversation, we're not ready for that conversation yet? Or do you find that those conversations are starting on their own? Because I love that you're seeing cooperatives emerge, especially when you hear about them, shutting down all the time. Where do you think we are in that trajectory?
Well, I think America's kind of interesting in terms of the rest of the world is looking at net zero commitments, and
Right.
America's really not. And so the conversation here seems to be quite different than what I see in other places where people are like, we can see the signals, we can see what's coming, we can see that we may not potentially have access to some of the larger brands, to the food companies. And you see all the food companies are talking about this right now in America. So I had an interesting conversation with a very innovative farmer recently, and he's running about 7,500 acres, but his neighbor came and knocked on his door who runs 50,000, and he said, "Teach me what you're doing. I want to understand what you're doing." And my friend was like, "Well, why?" And he's like, "Because I can see what's coming, I can see the signals, and I want to be a leader in this field." And so those people that are willing to kind of stand up now, they're not getting the same amount of ridicule, I don't think, as they did in the past. We're seeing a lot more publicity. And I also personally think that there's nothing that you can be against in terms of soil health, because it's not political. It doesn't matter what your belief system is, or your religion or any of that. It's how do we build soil health so that we have resilience, that we don't have crops that just tip over the minute that there's a heavy rainfall or there's a drought, or there's insect attack. We are in the perfect storm literally right now. And so I feel like producers themselves are taking this initiative.
I think what you're saying is that it really will it will be iterative, especially here. And I think in America, one of the biggest reasons for that is that our acreages are so vast in some places that people don't see it in the same way. When you work on a small acreage, there are places in Europe, for example, and I think that they are seeing the writing on the wall faster, because we still live in a place where it seems like there's just endless space and opportunity, and the signs of decline are just maybe a little bit harder to tease out when we're talking about these massive scales.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to feel like, I talked to someone recently in New Zealand, and they were like, "Hey, climate change is going to be great for us. We might get more rainfall and it might warm up. Yay!" And it's like, no, you need to travel. You need to travel, and you need to see where communities are really being impacted. And so if you just stay in one corner of the world and things are actually manageable, then it's easy to kind of write off what someone else might be dealing with. There are communities in America that can't keep up this stress and this debt loading and what's happening climatically. And then that's also the opportunity is we know that as little as 25,000 acres is enough to alter local climate. So seeing people either getting together, ranches or farms getting together and going, all right, let's actually be benefiting far beyond the gate, instead of what we see right now is, some of the biggest dust storms right since the 1930s is starting to happen right across the entire country, and the fires of like just that awareness that everyone's being impacted downstream from you. And what I know from farmers that I work with is they're really concerned about their societal impacts. They want to do well by their neighbors. And it's like, if you are doing things like chemical fallow, and degrading your land and not looking after your soil health and degrading microbiology, you're actually reducing the rainfall to your neighbors, and you're increasing dust storms that people are actually dying in their vehicles because of car crashes and dust storms. Is we need to just be looking, I think, more broadly and not kind of keeping your head in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening.
Yeah, it is happening. And I think the more opportunities we have to see that we really can change pretty quickly. I mean, COVID was one of those great opportunities to see what we're capable of, both of the good and the bad, but just that we are capable of quicker changes, I think, than we appreciate. And that is encouraging.
I also think and you can literally change someone's life by saying, hey, just eat what I'm growing for you for the next 10 days and then tell me what's happening in your body. Tell me how you feel. Tell me about your digestive system. We always do this with our students as we actually talk about the Bristol stool chart, and we get students observing their own bodily functions while we change their diet over an 8-day period of like, just look at how your body responds. How do you feel? And that's the storytelling opportunity for market gardeners is what does it feel like? What does it taste like? That remembrance of what food really tastes like when we look after soil. And I mean, it's much bigger than soil, obviously, but I think that's an industry where people, not industry, but, local food production where people can really appreciate having an experience that they're not going to get at the grocery store.
Totally. I mean, it's so exciting to hear you talk about that, because I do believe that for small scale agriculture and for the future of what I hope would be, sort of regionalized food systems, there is this opportunity right now for people to interact with who's buying their food, who's eating their food in a way that, historically has sort of belonged to, wine and other value-added agriculture, but the value add of rebuilding function, changing the trajectory from loss of function to gain of function, and what that tastes like. And people are so focused now on how sick we are. I mean, and they're not finding the solutions in any of the places that they've historically looked. And so being able to interact, it's not, I don't like to put it in sort of savior terms, but when you can connect with somebody who will then evangelize the benefits of eating the food, it changes everything. And I really think that this is that moment, because people, you look at Instagram and I don't even know, there's probably some analytics about how much of Instagram is just food and especially like this sort of lifestyle intervention.
I think it comes back a little bit to this, how we started this session together, is there's a mindset piece that's missing in market garden production that I don't say concerned, but that we point to, and that some of the conversations around success, some of the conversations around money are really dysfunctional. And so it's like, how do we frame our success? And I believe, and maybe this is not the case in America, but around 80% of market gardens are not profitable.
Right.
And maybe that's that is totally unsustainable. And then I meet market and that's not regeneration, right? It's not are you in a process of healing landscape and healing self? And some of our stories about money are old, they're ancestral, they're not your money stories. And so one farmer, I reckon, or a market gardener that would be worth people connecting to is Jodi Robuck. I don't know if he's been interviewed on this before.
I'll have to look, but yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. And just, really reframing what does success look like, and having operations that somewhere in your mind you've made money evil and you've made success evil and wrong. Like, all of capitalism is evil and people that have money are greedy, whatever it is that you want to call them. And so then that sticks on us in some way, and not being able to really step forward into success. And so that's one of the conversations I have with producers when I start working with them, is if that profitability piece has been lagging, is like, what's your actual relationship with money? So we have a bunch of online courses, and we're going to start offering this money conversation. It's called the Ecology of Money, as a live webinar, to just help people shift it. Because I think that's part of what's holding us back is, no one's going to look over the fence and go, well, that looks successful, I should do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important. A couple things come up, we get a lot of questions on the forum and requests for podcasts about the financial part of this. And I think that there is something so altruistic about market gardening that draws people to the work and the idea of feeding communities. And there is this sort of tenuous conceptual framework for community-supported agriculture that it's not, I guess it's not supported by a lot of infrastructure in a lot of places. And so it really becomes agriculture-supported communities when, things fall apart and you lose your customers or whatever. And I think that that part of that very unsexy part of how do we arrange a relationship with money that isn't to the detriment of every aspect of how we live, and not demonize it, but how do we talk about it? How do we think about it? How does it relate to how we feel about who we are in the world? Don't touch me with your dirty money, or, I can't possibly have enough. And I think it's correct. I mean, but be very excited to share those webinars that you're producing on that, because it's hard for people to talk about it too. And
it is.
It's something that a lot of people, I think, just are very, if not reluctant, downright refuse to discuss.
And all of that is historical stories, historical trauma, ancestral stuff. I spent about 18 months on my story trying to work out where did some of these patterns come. So for me, everything's a pattern. It's a pattern in a landscape. It's patterns with people and the relationships and all of it. So I'm always looking for all these threads that bind, that then create an outcome, because we can see the outcome's this. I've got all this debt. I'm never getting ahead. I feel like I'm struggling every day. Like, that's the outcome. And then look for what's the pattern behind it that's created that. And I have a lot of Irish roots. There's a lot of obviously trauma through the eco slaughter in the 19th century of Irishmen getting out of Ireland to escape the English. Is that money is struggle, money is hard, and you'll never have enough. And that's just what's run through my family forever, unquestioned. If you're not working hard, you're not successful. Well, then you're an Englishman. And none of that's true. Like, these stories we have, none of them are true. We collect evidence for it, but it's just a made-up story for what is just, if you were very cleanly went, money's just an acknowledgement of an exchange of energy, of a gratitude. And then we make it mean all the other stuff. And it doesn't mean that.
And it does. I mean, it does connect us to our deepest patterns, I think.
Yes.
At least now it does. So one about this very particular approach that you have to this more this more kind of internal work that we have to do to be able to really address our problems, and how for a lot of people, I think, especially in the farming space, but really even in the consulting space and the, sustainable agriculture space, the tendency is always to just go in and sort of the same way we've always done, like, with a hammer, with a hammer and a nail.
Yeah.
And even with these more, like frameworks for understanding soil health and understanding the ways that your practices relate to outcomes, this is more about getting to the scales over our eyes that don't allow us to see. And so I wonder, has it been difficult for you to hold that space? And, how have people reacted to it? And what have you done to sort of stay true to what you believe is the most important work, or the pre-work that has to, come before the work?
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder if part of it is getting older, or if part of it is that the world is changing. So I wonder if I care less about people's opinions these days. What they think about me is none of my business, that kind of take on things. So I feel like now it's got really hard. I'll change my direction, or I won't pursue that particular activity. And actually that has been hugely rewarding, is just going where I feel like I'm in flow, instead of trying to change the industrial military system, of like pushing up against some of that. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't, I'm not well when I'm in those spaces. And so it's not that I'm looking for the easy, but I'm looking at where am I more effective. And so where I'm finding my effectiveness is I'm not without saying like I'm a big fat head, but I'm a good educator. I can work people and work alongside them through a space of transformation. And those are the people that might go and work with the industrial military mindset, whatever. They might be the ones that are working in politics. They might be working in the Valley of the Beast in Iowa with corn and soy. They might be working with large corporations. Is if I can support those people, those are the ones that are actually having the impact in the world. It's not me. I'm not you don't want me hanging out in Washington. I'm a disaster because I'm tactless and all of that. I don't know how to play politics. Corporations don't really like me either, because you're asking for a systemic change, and that's got to come from someone they trust from within. And same with Corn Belt. They're not going to listen to me, a New Zealand woman. So I feel like I've given myself freedom to just focus on what is it that I do well, and not beat myself up that maybe those corn guys don't want to talk to me. That's fine. Whatever that looks like, there's someone that they will want to talk to, just not me. But yes, it really is these internal drivers, and the filters that we see the world are the biggest barrier. So being able to work with people and train them, and how do we lift the veil? How do we pull back those filters so we can see the world more clearly, is, I think, the most critical work.
Yeah. So talk about, as we close here, let people know what opportunities there are to work with you, what you're super excited about, maybe whatever's on the horizon for you, and and how people can get involved.
So we have fellowships of training. So people that want to do this as a career, for people that want to work in the regenerative space, organics, whatever that looks like for you, but people that are wanting to coach or consult professionally. So that program is really cool. I just want to say it's an extraordinary program. I really feel very blessed to be able to curate it, and then to have people out in the world that are making a big impact. So if you are wanting to work one-on-one, then that's where the fellowship's so helpful, is that there are people predominantly in the US right now. We have an English school running as I create. It will be run in September next year in Montana. So we're very excited about that. We also have a grazing course that's just come out, and it's called Grazing for Life. So it's really looking deeper into grazing in terms of how does that impact on soil health and microbiology. And so that only came out last week. So I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, so pumped. But we have a few online courses, and also what's happening for us right now is looking towards building a center for learning around an immersive experience. So people are really coming into a learning center to be enveloped by what does regeneration look and smell and feel and taste like, and working with the change agents. So bringing people together to have some of these big conversations about what does it look like to transform the system, what's not working well at the moment, what needs to be put in place with the people that are in those positions to make that change. And if that's the brands, if it's processes, whatever that looks like, of just bringing people together. And part of that's very selfish because it's not sustainable in any way.
Yeah. And it feels, I know I'm so sympathetic. I was feeling so sorry for you this morning because you come back from the other side of the world, and it's incongruous, we all, I think I am very sympathetic, because going places where you feel like there's a desire to hear the message, learn, interact, all those things, and you want to make that possible, but it becomes incongruous with the work at a certain point, and I think it's great. So would the center be in Montana?
Yeah. And the dream is that it will be in the corridor going into Yellowstone. So part of this, the drive for this is, what does it look like to really cohabitate with wildlife? This is the second most biodiverse grassland ecosystem in the world after the Serengeti. How can we produce food with bears and elk and beaver and badgers, ground squirrels, all these creatures, in a way that's just not really being done.
Yeah, well, that's not fear-driven or some other way that we've tried to make this work. I love that, because I think one of the things that we've been robbed of is this idea that there could be a version of our future, and not even a distant future that will take generations to come back, but where the return of trophic flows is really how we make our food better and how we make our lives better. So that's so exciting, and I will follow that. Very closely. Well, Nicole,
yes,
what a delight to get to spend an hour with you, and I'm so grateful that you did this when you're jet lagged. And if you have is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish you could have a minute on?
Oh, gosh, no, you did a really great job, and I think these conversations are so broad, and I think for any, like, for producers that are listening, sometimes this can feel so theoretical, and actually it's all important, and it influences your own daily flow, that there really is no separation between this and an outer landscape. So not doing your own personal work is actually affecting your land. So how do we really just keep taking it up a notch and be on this journey of really deep ecological true regeneration?
Yes. Well, it has been so wonderful to spend this time with you, and I wish you all the success. I'm very excited. I know a couple people actually who are really keen to take the new grazing course, and that 35-day course, I think, for anybody who the world needs more.
Weeks.
Yeah, 35 weeks. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's
35
fine.
weeks. It's a commitment, but we need more. We need more people. Yeah. And so thank you for putting that together. That can't be a small task. And thank you for all the work that you do. And I hope that you continue to be enlivened by this work, and that you and your family have a beautiful, quiet season, and that it's actually maybe a little quiet for you. I wish that for you.
Yeah.
And I look forward to speaking with you or being with you in person.
Yes, please. Let's do that.
It's such a joy to be reminded regularly how no matter how many times I have a conversation about soil, there's always something new to talk about. And it's inspiring, I think, to share the work of just one of many leaders who are out there trying to manifest a new future of how we grow food. And I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Nicole. I so enjoyed being with her. It's funny, we've almost met in person so many times, and we often are crossing paths in multiple places. But really, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate her spirit and her work and her commitment to putting things in a manageable framework for people who are either intimidated by or don't have the background in soil science or agroecology. And I hope that you are able to visit Nicole either in one of her workshops around the world or possibly in the future at a discovery center that we spoke about at the end of the podcast. Thank you to all of my comrades at the No-Till Market Garden podcast. Every day, I'm so inspired by these other people that are working on the No-Till Growers network. They work so hard. We all have day jobs, and yet they bring this inspiring work to all of your ears while you're doing inspired work. So just a lot of gratitude for my co-hosts, for Jackson and Dr. Professor and and Jesse and all of the folks at the No-Till Market Garden podcast. We appreciate you, and I look forward to talking to you guys next time.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Real quick, some things that we have going on. First, I do owe a quick apology because we had been planning to go and hang out at Marbleseed at the end of February and are now not going to be able to make it there, unfortunately. Just too many conflicts. So my sincerest apologies, but Marbleseed will still be rad, I'm sure. Loads of great speakers are coming. Otherwise, other stuff. Hannah and I announced our on-farm no-till field days for 2024 here at Rough Draft Farmstead. I will also be at the Organic Grower School outside of Asheville, North Carolina in March. And I thought that would be the last one, but I will actually be in California, at Riverside, California specifically, for the Grow Riverside and Beyond conference in early April. So that should be fun. All the links for those in the show notes, and also linked in the show notes is our shop where you can find my book, the Living Soil Handbook, and hats and other merch. Those things go to supporting this work that you're listening to right now. Alternatively, you can join the hundreds of donors who support us through patreon.com/no-till-growers and who not only get a bunch of discounts from various companies on seeds and footwear and all sorts of goodies, but also discounts on things like the farm tours here at my home farm. So not only can you support our work, but get a sweet bonus in the process. But that Patreon page is the absolute lifeblood of our work, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Harper Kaufman, Teresa, Chris Yates, Sean at All About the Garden, and Stephen Smith. Huge shout out to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. You all are amazing. Otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. Bye.